Welcome back, and now we are going to move on to our application questions. So the first application questions that we have here is, in a particular ecosystem where we find a community of species of different populations, what ecological interactions will the organisms engage in to ensure survival in the ecosystem? So here we have a scenario where they say that in a particular ecosystem, we find a community. And if you remember, a community is made up of different populations. And populations are species of the same organisms, or organisms of the same species rather. So now they are saying here we have a community. What ecological interactions will organisms engage in to ensure survival? So in a community. Now let us look at the solution to this problem. So the first point we have here is competition. This is the interaction with species from different populations and competing for food and other resources. So that is the first interaction that we are going to find in this community. Species of different populations interacting with one another and competing for food and other resources. Then we are going to see predation taking place. So this is when now certain species feed on other species for nutrition. Predators are going to hunt and kill their prey and then eat them for nutrition. Lastly, they are going to be forming symbiotic relationships to ensure that they survive. If you remember symbiotic relationships, we are speaking about parasitism, we are speaking about mutualism, and we are speaking about commensalism. So those are the engagements or interactions that we would find in a community of species. Right, moving on. Therefore, fast food restaurants would not exist if we were unable to eat species from various populations. It is simple. If we are not allowed to eat other species outside our own, then we would not have restaurants, because that's where we go and taste different meats, right? Moving on to question 2. If symbiosis refers to the relationship between organisms to ensure their survival, explain an example of mutualism using any two species in an ecosystem. So here you are going to choose any two species that have a mutualistic relationship. So the one that I chose to use was the example between the bee and the flower. So the first thing that you have to do is explain the term mutualism. This is a symbiotic relationship between two organisms of different species. These are two organisms from different species, and in this relationship, both species benefit. For example, a flower and a bee during pollination. When we speak of pollination, this is the process where the bee gets the food, which is the nectar, from the flower, and the flower benefits by being pollinated so that it can reproduce. So that is the example that I chose. Here is the picture that explains this. We have our bee that is feeding on the nectar here on the flower. So this is our flower and this is our bee. Now coming to our last application question. Here a fig tree relies on the fig wasp. So the fig tree relies on the wasp for pollination. And the fig wasp relies on the fig tree for reproduction. In the above example of mutualism, explain what happens if one species is wiped out. So the fig tree relies on the wasp and the wasp relies on the fig tree for survival. So now, if one of them is wiped out, what happens then? Now we are going to look at the solution to our question. Both the fig wasp, which is our pollinator in this case, and the fig tree need each other to survive. That's the first thing we need to understand. If the fig tree is wiped out, then the female wasp will not have a fig in which to lay her eggs. So if the wasps are wiped out, then the fig tree will have no pollinators to move the pollen from one tree to the other. This means if one of the two are wiped out, the other will also be wiped out. So that is the relationship that they have. So if one is wiped out, then eventually the other one is going to be wiped out as well. So we are going to stop here from now, and I'll see you after the ad break.